Praise be Jesus in prayer.
Now and ever.
St. Augustine, whose memorial recurs today, was born in Pegas in 354. It was an agricultural town located in what's now Algeria, near the border with Tunisia. His father's name was Petritius. He was a town councillor, and his mother was Saint Monica. The Roman Empire was rapidly becoming Christian, but there were still many pagans, including his father. But Petritius was happy to leave the education of the children to Monica, who raised Augustine and his brother and sister as Christians. However, she did not baptize them as infants. She followed a theory popular at the time that it was better to postpone baptism to adulthood, so as to wipe out the sins of youth. However, without grace, the sins of youth will be much more numerous, and there is no guarantee that the children will want to be baptized when they grow up. Augustine, in fact, grew out of his mother's religion. He was very intelligent, and his father sent him to a larger town where he could study about 15 miles away. This was long before there were public schools. You had to find a teacher in pagan, and there were only teachers where there were enough students together to pay for an education. Where after he had learned what he could with that teacher, he came home for a year, which he spent committing the sins to which he was attracted at 16. Then he went to Carthage to continue his studies. His father made great financial sacrifices for his son's future, but to send him to Carthage, other benefactors had to contribute as well. They did so because Augustine was brilliant and could have a great future with the right education. He studied rhetoric, the art of persuasion, which opened the way to various careers. He could teach, be a lawyer, or find a position in court. He read not so much for the content of the works, but to see how words were used to persuade, studying the art behind their choice so that he could do the same. He also read the scriptures, but he was increasingly unimpressed with them. He understood them literally, too literally, and when read that way, they seemed to him not very different from the myths of the pagans. He thought they said things unworthy of God. He began living with the woman shortly after he got to Carthage, and they had a son together, but she was lower class, so there was no hope of marrying. His father died about that same time. When he was 19, he was given a text to study that interested him not only for the way it used words, but also for what it said. It was a philosophical work by a pagan, but it exhorted to seek wisdom, and this Augustine resolved to do. The aim of his life would be to find wisdom. He got to know the Manichaeans, who seemed to have a better version of Christianity than his mother's Catholicism. He answered many of his questions about life and God, with their doctrine of two principles or gods. One, the source of good and of spiritual things, the other the source of evil and of material things. Meanwhile, his career was progressing. After his studies, he taught rhetoric in his hometown for 3 years, and then he was able to start teaching in Carthage. As time went on, he began to have questions that his Manichaean friends couldn't answer. They said he ought to ask Faustus, the brilliant Manichaean bishop who had been able to answer everyone else's questions to their satisfaction. After some years, Faustus finally came to Carthage, and Augustine managed to talk to him alone. But he was disappointed. Although Faustus had a natural genius for speaking, he wasn't highly educated and couldn't answer Augustine's difficult questions. That same year, when Augustine was 29, he decided to move to Rome. The students in Carthage were ill-behaved and disrupted lessons, and he was told that in Rome that didn't happen. Leaving his mother behind, and in fact ditching her at the port, he went to Rome and connected with the local group of Manichaeans. He was increasingly disappointed with the Manichaeism, but he didn't have any better option. He began to think that maybe it was impossible to find the truth, that his search for wisdom was in vain. Shortly after his arrival in Rome, he got sick, so sick that he almost died, but he did recover. At that time, he was unbaptized, a heretic, and living in sin. Looking back years later, he was sure that if he died then, he would have gone to hell. He thought that it was probably his mother's prayers that had saved him, reached him from afar to save him from hell. After his recovery, he resumed teaching. The students in Rome were indeed better behaved during lessons, but they had a worse problem than the students in Carthage. They would attend lessons until it was time for the first payment, and then they would disappear and find another teacher. There were so many teachers in Rome that they could learn a lot for free this way, but if a teacher didn't get paid, he couldn't live. The following year, the imperial court at Milan was looking for a new teacher of rhetoric, and Augustine got the job. By now his mother had reached him, and he had completely given up on Manichaeism. He didn't know what was true anymore. The Catholic bishop in Milan was St. Ambrose, a brilliant speaker, and Augustine went to listen to him, not to hear what he said, which would surely be nonsense, but to hear how he said it. But as he listened, the truth slowly penetrated into him. He began to realize that the Catholic Church didn't believe the simple-minded doctrines that he had rejected in his youth. The bishop kept repeating an expression from Scripture: the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Augustine had understood the Scriptures too literally, and it had killed him spiritually. It had led him to abandon the Church. St. Ambrose drew profound teachings from those passages by interpreting them spiritually, allegorically, and this was leading the young professor back to life. One by one, his objections to the Catholic faith fell away. He still had questions, but now believed that the Catholic Church must have answers. He would have liked to talk to Ambrose, but the bishop had so little time to himself to study and pray that Augustine didn't have the heart to take it away from him. Intellectually, he was now convinced and wanted to be baptized as a Catholic, but that meant abandoning his sins, and he couldn't find the strength to do that. He experienced that it was not enough to see the truth. Without a mediator, it remained beyond his reach. One day he was touched by grace. He was in the garden of the house where he was staying, talking with a friend. They had a scroll of St. Paul's letters on the table. Augustine was interiorly troubled. He wanted to abandon his sins, but they said to him, "Forever? Will you never enjoy us again?" He went off alone to think, and began to hear a sing-song voice saying, "Take and read, take and read." He tried to remember if there was any children's game that used those words, but he couldn't think of any. So he went back to the table and picked up the scroll and read it. His eyes fell on these words: "Not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires." He was touched by grace, and a flood of tears came to his eyes. He went quickly to tell his mother what had happened, and she rejoiced. A learned priest instructed him for baptism, and he was baptized by St. Ambrose at Easter. He was 32. The woman he had been living with decided that if they could no longer live together, she would become a nun, and he decided to live a monastic life dedicated to prayer and study with his son and some friends. They went back to Africa. They started making their way back to Africa, but at Ostia, the port of Rome, they had to wait for a while, and there his mother Monica died. A couple of years later, in Africa, now his son died. The year after that, he went to Mass in the city of Hippo, and the bishop was talking about how he needed a priest who was a good speaker to help him. The bishop spoke Greek and had a lot of trouble preaching in Latin. Augustine found himself roped into being ordained. 4 years later, he was ordained coadjutor bishop and became bishop when his predecessor died. As a priest, and then later still more as a bishop, he had a lot to do. Obviously, there was the pastoral care of his flock, and a learned bishop was also in demand as a preacher in other cities. Bishops were also expected at that time to arbitrate in legal disputes between Christians, to reconcile the parties in family disagreements, which were usually about inheritance, or in causes of civil friction. He was also expected to intervene with the civil authorities on behalf of the members of his flock. Then there was the defense of the church against the charges of the pagans, the Manichaeans, the Donatist schism, and the Pelagians. The Manichaeans might have been the easiest to deal with. He'd been thinking about their teachings for a very long time. He explained that evil is not something positive, it is the lack of something that should be there. So the Manichaean idea of another God, a God that is pure evil and the principle of evil, is really a contradiction. Pure evil would lack everything and therefore lack existence. The Donatists claimed to have a holier church and said that sacraments are only valid if the priest or bishop is holy, because no one can give what he does not have. But St. Augustine proved in the scriptures that it is Christ who acts through his ministers, so that sacraments confer the grace that Christ has, whether or not the minister personally has grace. He also proved the Donatists wrong in many things that they said about history. He proved them not as holy as they claimed to be. The error of Pelagius was the one that St. Augustine took most personally. Pelagius was a monk from Britain who had been baptized in Rome and had become well known there. He denied that there was any grace that helps us internally. There are external graces like hearing a homily, but no aid to the will within us. If you sin, it's just because you aren't trying hard enough. And that went directly against Augustine's personal experience. He had been there and had experienced his inability to stop sinning. Without the aid of grace, of internal grace, it just can't be done. This is why prayer is necessary for salvation. We need grace to be saved and to stay saved. If grace could be merited, it would not be grace. So the only thing we can do to get it is pray. During St. Augustine's later years, the empire suffered barbarian invasions. In 410, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, and the pagans said that this was because Rome had abandoned its gods when it became Christian. St. Augustine responded by writing The City of God, in which he proved that those gods were demons and explained many things about the Church. In 429, the Vandals, another tribe of barbarians, invaded North Africa. They laid waste one city after another, and in 430 they besieged Hippo. St. Augustine fell ill during the siege and had the short penitential psalms written out and hung on the wall, so that he could read them from his bed and pray God for mercy. He died that year at 75, but his memory lives on and his works live on, and he was the most influential church father in the West, the most influential Christian teacher in the West, really, for at least the next 1,000 years. Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Amen.